So I'll start us off. Kamilah, your presentation on the new Black Masculinity kind of sparked something in me because there are a lot of young Black male artists today who, when they express themselves by wearing more traditionally feminine clothing, they say that they were inspired by Prince. And I thought that was interesting because we're talking about someone who was doing this 30 plus years ago, but I don't hear them really reference anyone like from the 90s or from the 2000s. So was there a shift that happened? Was it hyper masculine in the 90s? So.
I think that was why I wanted to do this presentation for Batman in '89, because it was where you were starting to see this emergence of a more hyper-masculine Black identity, one that was very much kind of reinscribing that past idea of like the sexual super stud and the thug and the criminal in a way that for most of the 90s kind of took over. You know, everyone started copying the kind of gangster rap model, the model that really objectified women, and because they were, oh, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry. I'm having a private conversation up here. But they kind of, that model that was very misogynistic and objectifying women kind of took over. So I think that for a lot of people, Prince was the most popular and well-known person who kind of modeled that, and it went away for a while, to the point that it's even a conversation now when we see these young artists who kind of rebel against hegemonic ideas of masculinity and femininity. It's still in 2019 a conversation, so.
Okay. No, while D'Angela's getting situated, Karen, I saw Versace 1990 on your slide. What was that in reference to?
So you remember, he wasn't wearing those in the not screening we did not watch last night, but he's wearing it in the tour, right? He has these Versace prints, and that was the 1990. I had a slide up there, actually, I didn't have time to use, but that was the Versace brand of that time. So these, like, kind of like you were saying about regality, they look almost like royal patterns, right? So he was not living in a vacuum, especially at this time, I think. Like, there's a lot of context in fashion culture that he's employing at this time as well. So he's wearing that. Sometimes you see him with the pants and the blouse in typical full Prince attire. Sometimes he just has the blouse with that one-strapped spandex onesie that we saw so much of last night. Sometimes he just has the pants because he's taken the shirt off. So he's really using that print a lot in the 90s.
Awesome. Do we have time for two more questions? Okay, because I want to give Dereca and Christopher a chance. Christopher, you talked about some of the political concepts that Prince started to talk about. And one thing that disturbed me when I read old articles is a lot of journalists go, Prince is no deep thinker. His political concepts are really surface. Seriously, if you look at Rolling Stone, LA Times, this is what these journalists were saying. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. Why do you think that is a point of view that was out there during that time about Prince?
I mean, they really couldn't get past the look, so to speak, and when you're still trying to figure out, you know, what is the character behind what we're seeing, and when you're getting lost in the fact that here's this guy who literally can play any and everything, and he had a larger voice, and the platform was starting to expand, there were so many different components to who he was. I mean, a lot of people didn't even realize that the guy had hops on the court, you know? Like, he would literally outshoot you and cross you over and do all this other stuff, even with heels on. But also, here was someone who literally thought about the world and literally used it as a basis for anything and everything that he could kind of document on record. And it was just definitely one of those things, like someone said earlier, you know, he was very much abreast of what was going on in the world, but it was just a situation where it was a point where now he could utilize that basis to talk about all these different pertinent things that kind of bothered him. And one of the biggest things that bothered him, again, and you're starting to see this resurface, I talked about the Atlanta child murders. He really followed that story very, very closely. And now you're starting to see the podcast coming. There's like a mini series coming and all this other miscellaneous stuff. But it was really one of those things where he really could speak about the issues, especially as it affects us, because ultimately he was that person that he wanted to bring people together through his music, but also use it as a basis to really amplify how he felt.
Awesome. Dereca, quick two-parter. I saw something on your slide that said Kendrick Lamar and the Forbidden Marriage. Can you tell us what that was about? And then second part, why do you think that the Batman era is so kind of overlooked compared to the other eras?
Okay. I knew I was going to go long, so I didn't talk about that slide. So really, that's just about my experiences at Paisley Park. After doing the flash mob, I was, given some opportunities to go there. I was there for the Kendrick show, but I also am a minister, so hence the Black Liberation Theology, and two of the members of my congregation asked me to secretly marry them at Paisley Park, and we tried to get permission, and it was kind of like, we're not going to say that we know this is happening. And so I was able to do that the night that Kendrick performed. And so I don't know how many people were married there, but there's at least two. So yeah. And in terms of, let me make sure I understood the question. What did you say, being?
Overlooked. I was actually talking to Karen about this earlier. When we try to find scholarship on Prince's career, there's really not a lot about this era. And I know a lot of people say, oh, we thought it was a throwaway album. He was just using old tracks. So I just wanted to get your take, and anyone can jump into.
Well, I'll just say really quickly, as I said, I'm new in higher ed. I've been there for 5 years. I work in student affairs, and it just is amazing to me that I even teach about Prince, because I entered this as a person who loved him. So the idea of a throwaway album for people who really know him and love his music is a misunderstanding of the standard of excellence that he used and the quality of care that he put into what he did. It's one of the reasons why I have so much, I said to D'Angela, because I was late in every single thing I was supposed to do, I said to her yesterday, I said, I promise, now that I understand your standard of excellence, that I will not be, not missing that mark in the future, because that is how he was. He did things well. Every single time he presented himself. So the idea that there's a throwaway album is just for people who really were kind of looking for something that people wanted to see him in them. And if they didn't see Batman, if they weren't, that they just didn't. But scholarship, I think, around Prince is actually, I'm really impressed. I text my co-professor, Adam, and I said, we got to step our game up. Because the scholarship on Prince from Manchester to today is so rich and deep, and I feel like people just didn't understand. And so, it's always after you're gone, right? If you look at most of the great, not just Black leaders, but musical leaders, it's after you're gone that people really start to have a sense of the import of who you are, right? That you are so deep in a color in terms of style that they had to do was turn the Eiffel Tower purple, and everyone understood what that is. And a friend of mine said to me, who else owns a color? Right? Like, who else, style-wise, so embodied a color that all you would have to do is turn a building that color and the whole world would know what that meant. So I'll just say that.
And I'll add to that. Of course, around 89, we talked about hip-hop kind of shaping the Black narrative in terms of music. And in the music, this is just from the journalism background. A lot of times, when artists sell 20 million records like Purple Rain was, that's like the pinnacle of someone's success. So what can you do beyond 20, 30 million records? Around the World Today did double platinum. Still a chart-topping record, but in industry standards, that's a flop because we didn't push the 20, 30 million like your previous record did. But with Prince, it was just more or less, I want to make music because I enjoy it. I want to be able to bring in all these different cultural references that I'm experimenting with and bring in some of these different collaborators because it feels right. Now, to a marketing executive or to the industry or someone that's handling publicity, no, you can't do this. We have to do something that literally kind of sounds like this rap stuff that's going on. Or we have to do something that sounds like what's on your MTV Rap. So we have to do something that's on video. So you have to be within that frame or use that reference to kind of drive the music that you're making. So it wasn't really necessarily was a throwaway because the Batman soundtrack was still a chart-topping album. Batdance was a #1 record. The album still was one of the top albums that year, but when you have an industry that's so fixated on trends and so fixated on what's hot right now, what's the flavor of the month, it's going to be perceived as a throwaway because the industry and the journalism community and all the music critics, they're the ones that's kind of shaping the narrative versus the artist that's literally creating the product, or they're cerebrally coming up with the different sounds, or they're coming up with the concepts. It was still a successful project. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't just that. But the point is, we knew the impact that thing was making. We knew the sonics that were going into it. We understand the conversations behind it. So it's still a success because it's still a part of that canon that I spoke about. And whether you want to believe it or not, Prince's projects are no different than anything that Ernest Hemingway wrote. It's nothing different than what Herman Melville wrote. It's nothing different than what Langston Hughes wrote. It's no different than what any of these writers wrote. That is like literally a library of literature. For You is a book. Controversy is a book. Purple Rain is a book. Around the World in a Day is a book. If we had courses where we could literally utilize these texts as textbooks, do you imagine how many scholars we would literally have out here? So I think we're really looking at a situation where every product that we saw was more of an expansion, and we looking at success. It was a success because we are here having these conversations right now, turning him into a text and turning him into an icon because of the work that he's done and not the number of records that he sold, because he never cared about that.
I think that's an excellent way to wrap this up, actually. So thank you all so much just for your brilliance, and we have a lot of research to do ourselves going forward, so thank you so much.
And thanks to you all, too, for coming and showing your support and your fandom and just your memorabilia and just your love. We get the energy from you as well, so thank you as well.